This is a podcast by WellHouse Church, where we talk about what it's like to be a Christian Monday through Saturday, to live as a person of faith in a culture against faith.
Hey, we look the same as last week.
Yeah.
We're batch recording some content.
Yeah.
So last week, and for you guys and for us, it was
Like
5 minutes ago.
Yeah. We took a break to grab some more coffee.
Yeah. We started talking about purity culture in reference to this series of sex and sexuality and all that stuff. But now, as we left you guys last week, we do want to dive into the long-term effects of purity culture.
Yeah.
And once again, we want to preface this entire conversation. We are aware that we're cisgendered, straight white males, having this really hard conversation.
I wanted to get some ladies who grew up in purity culture and had some of these effects on the podcast, but unfortunately, just with stage of life and scheduling and things, I couldn't get one.
Yeah. So we are going to do our best to tell that story.
And if you have something to add,
Yeah.
or would like to join the conversation, join the discussion group on Facebook on the WellHouse Church page under the Let's Talk podcast.
Yeah.
That's why we have those for every one of our podcasts, is because we want you in the conversation with us.
Yeah. And if you are a woman who is coming out of purity culture, we really want we want to hear your insight.
I want to hear your story.
If you feel comfortable sharing, please do.
Yeah.
Please do, because we didn't live it the same way you did.
No, we were around it, but it did not impact us as men.
The way that it did you.
The way that it did you. We were given a pass in purity culture under the allure of boys will be boys that young women were not given.
Yeah, and it's so unfair.
Oh, it's absolutely unfair.
It's so unfair. So you kind of had like a roadmap for how you wanted this episode to go.
Yeah, and I want to preface this that this will not be everyone's story.
No.
But this is a lot of people's story that grew up in purity culture. And that is that the entire narrative was sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex. And even for women, dress modestly, don't tempt the boys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't wear anything that's too revealing, all those types of things. And so I have heard, what, you got something to...
Yeah, just something that just popped in my head. Shouldn't it be the boy's responsibility not to be tempted or to not act on temptation?
It should, not to be too cliche, it takes two to tango.
It does.
It should be equal parts, the boys and the girls. But I do not think, now I don't want women, young girls running around dressed immodestly.
No.
But at the same point, I remember hearing a preacher when I was a youth pastor, and really diving into the pastorate, and really it was in youth ministry where I began to wonder how my teaching affected the hearer.
Yeah.
Because youth are so impressionable.
They're sponges.
Exactly. And I heard this preacher say that girls shouldn't be allowed to wear leggings or yoga pants because they were nothing more than ankle-length panties. Vehemently disagree. Women, you're covering yourself. You should be allowed to wear yoga pants in public if that's what you want. If that is something that you want. It reflects your identity, your personality. If you feel beautiful in those, whatever, you should be allowed to wear those.
Yep.
Men, if it's a big deal, don't look at her butt. Like, control your eyes. Her face is a long way from her butt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I vehemently reject that idea.
Well,
that I don't now. Once again, I don't think in the nicest way possible. I don't think young women should run around looking like strippers. Right. I don't think they should be that revealing. But I also don't think that because there's a fear of tempting young boys that they should have to temper their style or what makes them feel beautiful.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Totally agree. And what's super crazy about this is growing up around purity culture. I remember one time, it wasn't at a church that you and I went to together.
Okay.
It was a different one. There was a girl who came wearing a revealing top, and then one of the female leaders in the church gave her jacket to cover up with. So not only were they stifling this girl, they had the women in the church brainwashed to it too.
Well, and not just that, this woman gave this girl her jacket, which I imagine was ill-fitting on the young girl.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, I just, there's so many things wrong with that. The narrative should not have been entirely on the girls. The narrative should have equally been men, young boys. Control your eyes, control your thoughts. Like, grow up. Like, I don't know what else to say.
Be a man.
And I don't think that was fully communicated. I remember at times it was communicated.
Yeah.
But like, the purity culture movement on women or on young girls was shouted through a megaphone.
Yeah.
Whereas with boys, it was whispered in our ears behind closed doors.
And like we said last week, at least in our experience, it typically focused on porn.
It did.
More than it
or
did
lust. A
porn
lot
and
of
lust. It never focused on controlling your actual sexual activity.
Correct.
Which seems bass backwards to me, honestly.
Yep.
But
no,
whatever.
for sure. But because of all of this, one long-term effect that I've seen and heard from both young women and young men who are married to young women that grew up in purity culture, as well as the men that grew up adjacent to it, is that even after marriage, female women sometimes struggle with embracing their sexual urges because the narrative had always been sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad.
Yeah.
And you can't just turn that narrative off now that you're married.
No.
Right, especially if you were a part of purity culture where you failed and had to take the ring off. Right? Now I've got additional shame from that. And now I'm supposed to go into my marriage where, according to the scriptures, whatever is mutually consent is fair game there. I mean, the Bible never explicitly rejects different types of sexual acts between married couples.
No.
So whatever is your pleasure,
and it's equally wanted on both sides.
Equally wanted, and there's
Consented
respect
to.
and consented to on each side. You're fair game to please each other however you choose.
Yeah.
But even if you have that thought, if you have that urge to do something, your mind immediately rushes to, oh wait, that's impure.
Yeah.
Right? Or I've heard this from a lot of people, sex is not good.
Yeah.
Because
Can't tell you how many times I've heard that.
Yeah, like it's just not enjoyable because it wasn't, the narrative was not, hey, embrace your sexuality, embrace your sexual desires in a healthy way.
Yeah.
It was suppress them, get them out of here, lock them behind a closed door. Do not succumb to them.
The way that I think we need to think about this is for, depending on how old the girl is when she gets married, upwards of 2 decades of this idea being tattooed on her brain. When she gets married, that tattoo don't go away.
Right.
It's still there, and it's painful to remove.
Yeah. No, that's a really good metaphor. That's a really good metaphor. Because like we said, you can't just turn off the way that you've been taught. And as we talked about in the first episode, the unique thing that happens when it's related to our sexuality is shame.
Yeah.
Rarely can someone do a sexual sin and feel guilt without feeling shame. And the difference between them is staggering.
Yeah.
Guilt says, I've done a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Shame says, I am a bad thing.
Yep.
Me as a person, I am a bad thing. You've tied shame to your identity.
Mm-hmm.
We tied sexual purity to the identity of young women. And so even having sex in healthy, loving, monogamous marriages triggers shame for some of these women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to overcome, as you said. And I say it all the time in premarital counseling. You can have good sex and a bad marriage.
Yep.
You can never have a good marriage if you have bad sex.
Yeah.
It will not last.
Yep.
I mean, there is just no way.
No.
And so what we've done is, I think, this is just me, I would love somebody to link a study or statistic. If not, I'll find one and link it in the discussion group on the Let's Talk discussion group of WellHouse Church's Facebook page. But if I had to guess, the numbers of divorce are equally as high amongst women who grew up in purity culture as they are for people who grew up outside the church, if not potentially higher. Because there's so much pain in struggling to overcome sexually.
I would disagree.
You think so?
Yeah. Obviously, I don't have any stats for this.
I'm gonna go find a study.
Yeah. Logically, for me, though, it seems like even if you're having bad sex in a marriage and you're coming from purity culture, you've typically already heard the narrative that divorce is bad, right? And you shouldn't get a divorce. And if you do, then you're shamed for getting a divorce and all that stuff. So there's all these things are compounded. And I think that you would stay in a bad marriage.
Fine.
Just to avoid that shame.
Maybe. I do have a stat that says 48% of women that identify as Christians say that they would have an affair if they never got caught.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, like, they're at least looking for more sexually, and maybe they wouldn't get a divorce, per se, but they're definitely looking for some different sort of kind of sexual pleasure.
Outlet. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Like, logically, that makes sense.
And that number is even higher among men.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure it's like 65% if I had to guess.
It's in the 60s.
Yeah.
60% of men who identify as Christians that say they would have an affair. Or that sex outside of marriage is okay, or, some level of sexual, not exploitation.
No, I was going to say exploration.
Yeah, sexual exploration outside of their marriage is more than acceptable.
Yeah.
Which once again tells me that both people are not sexually satisfied in their marriage.
Typically, yeah.
Now, I need to look for a study to comparably amongst secular people to see if the numbers relate 1-to-1 or if they're higher or what. But it does go to show you that purity culture has had long-term effects on women in marriages.
Yep.
And excuse me, I don't think that, well, let me say it this way. Those struggles upon women in their marriages, they cannot be overlooked. And the other thing that I would say is we can't repeat the cycle.
Yeah.
We've got to find a new way to instill within our young people a desire for sexual purity, and while also giving them space to live their sexuality in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Purity culture was not and is not the answer.
Nope.
We've got to find a new way to do that. Having healthy conversations
is a great
very good first start. Telling your children that they're loved no matter what, that their sexual desires are normal, they're healthy, they're not a product of sin.
No.
Like all those things. I think that's another piece we didn't really talk about.
Yeah. We didn't talk
about. The narrative around sex was told as that sex is sin.
Yeah.
And so even if you put the caveat like outside of marriage, sex is sin, right? A lot of times we wouldn't. A lot of times we would just say, no, you can't have sex, or you shouldn't have sex, or those kinds of things. And as you think about it, right, just think about how you're mapping out your love map and your attachment, your connection. Those are building blocks. Those are pavers for that map and attachment.
Well, so let's think about it like this. Let's think about it cognitively, okay? Your brain does this really weird thing where if you hear two things in somewhat of the same context, you automatically fuse them together.
Right.
So if you hear the word sin coupled with sex over and over and over again, your brain will merge the two concepts.
Well, and even furthermore, if our dad used to say this all the time, and I think it's great because a lot of parents would look at the young love of their teenagers and go, you're not really in love.
Yeah.
Our dad used to say all the time, hey, puppy love is real to puppies.
That's right.
And so you're also being told a narrative that, hey, this person that you love, you don't have to have sex with them.
Yeah.
And your mind is fusing them together. And for a lot of people, especially from the purity culture movement, they date for years before they get married.
And you're expecting them to be perfect sexually, and they're dating for literal years.
Yeah, and you're constantly telling them, don't have sex, don't succumb. I remember a piece of this narrative was...
I'm also just going to say, I'm sorry to cut you off. That is asinine to me. That you are expecting this couple who have been dating for years and who have real, true, deep feelings for each other, that they're not going to slip up.
Yeah, I mean...
that's just asinine to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's no different than any other type of sin.
No.
Right? And it's probably one of the hardest ones to fight.
Yeah.
Now that's also not to say we shouldn't just take the,
uber liberal approach.
Yeah, either. There's grace for that and we can just do whatever. That's not the answer.
No.
But at the same point, there's equal grace for that as when you tell a lie, right? And so I think, it's this really weird thing that we've asked them to do.
Yep.
Right? And
it just blows my mind at how unfair it is and how honestly just so uneducated and uninformed it is. Because what else does shame do to a person? What does it do? Do you know?
What do you mean?
Like, do you know what it does to you physically and mentally?
Well, it lowers your self-worth.
It lowers your self-worth. It leads you into depression and anxiety. Yeah. Do you know why? And I'm actually guessing this. I don't know. And I doubt there's a study out there to prove this, but I might do one day. But when you shame these young women, we're wondering why we see such high depression and anxiety levels in women. Mm. Maybe it's because they've been shamed for the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I think, and here's what I would say to all my parents or older people who are proponents of purity culture that are flustered right now in our conversation. Maybe you didn't intentionally shame them.
No.
Maybe that wasn't your goal. And we've said that we don't think there was malicious intent here. But when you've tied their identity to their sexuality and their purity of sexuality, you have shamed them when they fail. Even if you didn't know they failed, you shamed them. Because they deeply inherited that understanding that their purity was their identity.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you might be right onto the anxiety piece, and the depression piece. And I think maybe there was a lot of it there beforehand.
Yeah.
And then it's expounded. Because the other thing is like you have to learn how to have sex with someone.
Yeah.
You have to learn what they like. You have to learn their body, their preferences, what their desires are.
Yeah.
And as you're trying to learn that, there's some times where you do some things that's kind of not good.
Well, so let's just, yes, absolutely.
And so what happens is these women can easily get to a point where they go, oh man, I'm not doing it right. I'm not good enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that expounds the anxiety, the depression, the lacking in self-worth.
Yeah. But when you look at it, you got to look at it generationally as well, right? Because as we stated, purity culture didn't really start until the turn of the century and all that stuff. And so when you have that coupled with a woman's place is in the kitchen, they're not allowed to express themselves in the way that they need to because the man controls the woman's expression. They're not allowed to work. They're not allowed to do anything. Their sole purpose is to provide for the family or to take care of the family and to take care of the man sexually. You couple all of these things together, plus the shame that they would feel at a younger age for giving in, leading to this final place of, I am not worth anything.
Yeah.
I am not worth anything. I don't know how nobody's made all those connections.
Yeah, and I think people have. I would point to the Liturgist podcast and their episode on purity culture. I think people have made those connections, but people in our positions of being a moderate Baptist church have not been vocal about this and have not said, and this is how I want to end this episode. Ladies, I am sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry that the church did this to you. I'm sorry that in an attempt to do something good, we created a lot of hurt for you. I am sorry that you have had to experience this level of shame that's connected to something that's so deep to your identity as a person of God, made in the image of God. I am sorry.